And we're live.
We're live. Happy Friday, Jens. How are you
Happy
doing?
Friday. Flat cap and round cap Friday.
Yeah, it's been an interesting start for me. Those who are on some of our community channels that Jens and I are both part of will know that I've been on a racetrack early this morning, and doing something a little different to this physical and virtual world that we've come to know over the last couple of years, and stepping outside of the four walls, so-called, of our rooms, which has been cool to start a Friday a little different, but great to be with you, Jens.
Yeah, same. How did you get, like, when did the race start that you have been there early? Like, that's nuts.
Yeah, we had a cool dinner last night and got, so it was a bit of a late night and an early rise. So we were up at 6 a.m. this morning
Huh.
for breakfast, and then it's about 20 minutes, half an hour drive to the hill climb.
Huh.
So it's a cool race here in South Africa. And now they've just been qualifiers, and the guys have been really testing and getting their lines right. As with everything that you do, you have to test and figure things out.
Yeah.
And then they've got some finals that will kick off at 1 o'clock this afternoon.
So you will go back.
Yeah, we'll go back. We've just hopped out
Awesome.
to obviously be on this live session with you, and do a little bit of work in between. But that's what it's like. You have to find this concept of balance that I think people sometimes refer to as, thinking about life balance as 50-50. But I prefer to think of it as something that's always evolving and changing. And you really, just as long as you're aware of it, you can have a balance of 90-10, 70-30, or even 80-20. So it's evolves with your life and evolves in the different spaces that you're in.
Additionally to that, before I lose that thought, is it's also priority and focus. Like you're taking a priority and leaving that racetrack, coming back, doing a live show, and then going back, and that fits to the discussion we have had, or the interview we have had with Sabina, which I don't know, comes out in 2 weeks or something, but we recorded it this week, so it feels like yesterday, but it was the day before yesterday. And she was
Yeah, so
mentioning that as well, as like creating focus and priorities, and being an entrepreneur just means that you need to do that in ways that it works out on the long run. Yeah.
yeah, and I also think, it also gives different influences to your type of thinking. And I think that's super important in this, always on digital society in which we live in, is to have those different priorities and be aware of them, because you'll also gather different energy from different spaces. And I mean, I posted yesterday on Facebook just around the energy that I got from being back in a coffee shop. And I haven't, physically worked from a coffee shop in maybe 7 or 8 months. And I think that it's just, again, and I know, Jens, you went out for breakfast this week as well, and
Yeah.
it's remarkable just what that does to your thinking, does to your energy levels. And I think that maybe we've undervalued, because we've become so used to this, camera 2D experience that we've got on, which is not bad. It's how we met, of course, and we hope to meet in person later in the year. But maybe we should jump into the episode, and the topic that we've got for the live session today. Or maybe you want to welcome people first, actually.
Of course we welcome people. So anyone who is listening, watching this live, mainly watching, because you can't just only listen to it. We need to figure out, by the way, how that must be possible as well. Live broadcast, stream in audio only, like a radio thing. So for everyone who is listening, watching live, give us a shout out, share wherever you want to share it, but as well drop into the chat and say hi, where you come from, where you're listening, watching. I'm always going back to listening. Crap. Where you're watching, what you are about, and of course the topic of today, Joshua, is, what is it?
Yeah, so the topic's quite an interesting one, and it's one that sort of developed out through the week, and it came off from a blog post that I posted, I think, on Tuesday or Wednesday this week. And the question that I spoke about in the blog post was, I'd really been doing some thinking and thinking back on my own experience and journey so far, and I came up with the question of, what do young thinkers need? And I wrote a bit about that, and I shared some of my views. And so the topic that I sort of built off that for today is, what do young thinkers need as they navigate the workplace? And the reason I put young thinkers in the workplace together is because I think that we're at quite an interesting time. We're in the 9th month of 2021, and this year is flying. if you think about it from a timing perspective. But it also means that now you've got different things that are happening inside of the workplace. So you've got the graduates that are coming out of their university experiences or graduate programs. They're now going to start looking for employment and things like that. And you've also got potentially young thinkers inside of existing organizations that are looking for a leg up. They may be looking for a new role inside of that space, and they're also looking for something different. So that's a topic that we've got for today. So Jens, maybe to kick things off, what's the first thing that jumped into your mind when you heard the topic?
What young thinkers need. Oh, yeah, of course, I always go into my mindset. But then if I turn back, so I was a young thinker. I started one day. Um, and I think the utmost, most important thing for me, it was more an opportunity, and connecting that to trust. We can go deeper into all of that, but it's really like, hey, there's a possibility to get started. Hey, there's a possibility to engage and start a learning journey without having the pressure of performing straight away. So, from an opportunity perspective, if you get the opportunity as a young thinker to be part of something and slowly grow, graduate into that, I think it's one of the most amazing stepping stones to get into the working world. We just start off with that.
That's a lot, huh? You've really opened up a big rabbit hole, Jens, is probably the best way to describe it in my mind. When you spoke about trust, you spoke about opportunity, learning, and then the space to not just have the pressure to perform. And where I'm going to choose to start inside of all of that is the concept around trust. And I think what young thinkers need is that they need someone to trust them. And if you're an experienced thinker, and also if you're a young thinker and you're hearing that and you think, okay, sure, but I do have trust, or I do give trust to someone. But do you really? Because I've been in situations where I've as myself, have I trusted myself? Have I trusted my judgment? Or have I always doubted what I'm going to do as a young thinker, because maybe I'm not sure of my thinking. I think I'm not mature enough, or I think I'm not ready to fulfill that role that I've been asked to fulfill. And I think as a young thinker, that can be incredibly daunting when you come into the workplace, and maybe you've been at university and you've been studying for 3 to 5 to 6 years. And then you come into a role and you get given this responsibility, and someone's given you that responsibility because they're trying to trust you with it. And if you don't trust yourself to actually fulfill that responsibility, it's going to be incredibly hard. And on the flip side, thinking now from an experienced thinker's perspective, is how do you go about creating trust for a young thinker? How do you go about pushing them to do their best work, but also giving them the tools and the space to figure it out? And that's what I think is a big part. I mean, before we started recording, we were also talking about that space around making the space to figure it out, but also having the trust within yourself to do that, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's as valid on a personal level in the same way it is valid as a corporation. So how do you set up, if we just take the first part, and you have mentioned that in one of the other episodes, like the onboarding process of a person starting a new organization that can be experienced or young thinker. How do you get a person onboarded into an organization from a human perspective, not about, hey, this is how it works and this is what you need to do? It's like, how do you get them part of the culture? How do you secure that they feel well, they feel listened to, they understand how they can grow, how they can evaluate themselves, all these kind of things in a corporate environment? I think it's in the same way important as you as leader giving the trust is as well. How do you create trust from a process perspective, um, as an organization? I think it's also critical in a starting point.
Yeah, and I'll tie that to Jens, what you mentioned about learning. And I think that when we think about, and we've spoken about this in different conversations, and I think from this week in particular, I've been reflecting a lot about this concept of trust and learning, and also responsibility, and then bringing that together in the concept of balance. And you mentioned, Sabina, and her experience and her journey so far, in terms of she had to learn to trust herself to, figure things out. But she also had to then, when she got the ball rolling and that sort of that change and that flywheel started to turn, she then also had to trust from a responsibility perspective. And all of that can be, encapsulated in this learning environment. So she had to learn to trust herself. She had to learn then to trust others once things started to move and there were different responsibilities that needed to be filled. And then from a bigger picture perspective is she's still learning.
Yeah.
And she'll be the first to tell you she doesn't have it all figured out. And I think, Jens, you and I have both mentioned that in different circles. We are still learning as we go. If we wind the clock back 5-6 weeks ago when we first started this live experiment and prototype, as we like to call it, it's a vastly different space that we're in now.
Yeah.
And I think, to maybe ask you a question about learning and young thinkers, when we say or repeat the question of what do young thinkers need, how do we frame that better? Because when you hear that question, it's a big question.
Yeah.
And
It's too
maybe
wide.
if we think too wide, if we zoom it in and we say, I know Jens, you're a big fan of getting practical and getting some action into it. What are some of maybe the hooks that we could put inside of that question to help people answer it maybe?
Yeah, I think is really going down and defining what is a young thinker as like one thing that people understand what a young thinker is. But we're more going, because I was writing down the question as well. What do young thinkers need as they navigate the working world? So if we just take the navigate as a part, is how do we define navigation for a young thinker? So if you start in an organization and it's your first experience in the working world, what are all the different challenges you face? And I think to really speak to points, we need to go into what are the challenges people will face. And then, like you said, I think this sentence is like the umbrella of navigation in a working environment and young thinkers, like, which can mean everything or nothing. But then it's like going into details of how do I connect to my manager? How do I prove that I'm worth it? How do I um, get well along with my other fellow employees? How do I learn how to do things inside the work environment? How do I engage with clients? Like all these different questions can be an episode in itself already,
Yeah.
where you can always go down. And I think that's to make it very, very practical. That's something which I think we need to dig into in the reverse mental lab environment to prove or provide the opportunities and the support for people who have that need. Because I think there are a lot of amazing experienced thinkers who can give that experience on, hey, this is how you could be doing it. Um, but it's really about going deeper into understanding what and then testing. Like we do tests the whole time. We do prototypes the whole time. If you're a young thinker, if you take yourself into, okay, I have no idea how I should engage with my managers. Like it's my first manager and I'm scared. How do you do that? It's like get going. It's like
Mm.
talk to them, figure it out.
Yeah, and you also, you've used the term before in this setting, but also in different podcasts we've recorded together around the concept of just starting.
Hmm.
And that is maybe for something, answering that question, what do young thinkers need in navigating the workplace? And it's almost like saying, hey guys, you need to just start. And that is also just taking that first step and also receiving the feedback. Because
Yeah,
I think sometimes, when we're hesitant in starting, it means that we are delayed in receiving feedback, which means that we are then also delayed in the way that we can improve.
yeah,
And the way that we think about prototyping and experimentation, I think helps our own minds develop in a way that is positive towards improvement. But I also think that it's just a way of doing things where you're not necessarily being hesitant in engaging because you're realizing, hey, I'm not going to get this right. And I mean, Jens, we also recorded a podcast this week around the difference between perfection
yeah,
and why do people really strive for perfection, and what negative impacts does it have, but also what positive impacts does it have. And so we all sort of bring this back around to saying there's a difference between a map, and the territory. So when we think about a map, and that's maybe where I start my thinking around what do young thinkers need. Young thinkers maybe need a map around how they can go about doing things, but the territory, so the physical space that or the employment environment that you're in, is going to be different for everyone. So we can talk about, how to go about and do things, but it really comes down to you as a young thinker. And I think that you need to step up to the plate, as I've referred to before, but also challenge yourself and trust yourself to figure it out.
Yeah. And to that point, I don't know if we mentioned it in one of the podcasts already. I know that we talked about it, being open and asking. Say, hey, I would like to get this. I would like to learn this. I have no idea how this works. Can you help me? And that's not normal in a work environment. And that sounds stupid maybe right now for a lot of experienced thinkers, but who are saying it's like, yeah, of course it is. But if you start in an organization, I have had it like, I don't know, 20 something years ago. Like, I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know how to get my point across and say, okay, you want me to do this. Can you please let me know how to do that? I have no idea. I've never done it. And instead of just racing off and just trying to do it, it's like being open and say, hey, I have no idea. That's one part in asking. The other part is asking him what you need. Asking in, hey, I need more support from you. Hey, I would like to get to know this. Can you please involve me in that because I want to be part of that? If you don't ask, it's not going to happen. A lot of things, and maybe that's just the way how we are humans are structured. You're just not doing it. Same way if you're an experienced thinker from, I always joke with my buddies, if you don't ask for a pay raise, you will not get it. Like, which boss is coming to you, which is rarely happening. I've had it in the past as well. But it's like, which boss is saying, you should get a 20% pay raise, 5%, 10%, whatever. Like, it's rarely happening. So if you're not coming and going, hey, I think I deserve a pay raise because of this, this, and this, it's not going to happen. At least it's not going to happen as early. And I think that's something as a young thinker you need to learn as well, to get into a point of saying, I would like to get this. And that doesn't mean that you always get it, but if you don't ask, you will definitely not get it. To 90% at least.
Yes, I love that concept of asking the question, and whether you have to ask the question in a different way, perhaps, to feel more comfortable in going about that. So you maybe ask a preceding question to the main question. So again, building confidence within yourself and the way that you go about establishing that framework. And I really think where this really ties to one of our red threads and core principles inside of the Reverse Mentor Lab is that concept of cross-generational learning. And I think that is something that young thinkers really do need inside of their growth from an organizational perspective and a personal development standpoint. And the reason I feel very, very strongly about that is because if you think about the opportunities, and in the blog I wrote about exposure to strategic discussions. And you might think, okay, well, there's a time and a place for a young thinker to be inside of a strategic discussion environment. And I agree with you, you're 100% right. And you don't need to flood or overwhelm a young thinker by having to deal with these big concepts inside of a strategic space. But how can you bring young thinkers into that environment so that you can then almost, to use an analogy of dipping their toes in the water, so you're introducing them to some of the concepts so that then if their interests are piqued, they will then go and find out more for themselves, and you'll be amazed by what that can do when you bring that energy back inside an organization. And if you think about, the concept that some organizations are dealing with today is, how do I retain top talent? How do I attract top talent? And it's all about that experience and consciously and intentionally designing that experience, but also being mindful of what it is that people actually need. And I think when we think about, our customers and our clients, that we really ask, hey, do they really need this? We ask a lot of why questions. Now, how do you bring that same thinking back into your organization to help young thinkers develop going forward, but also to help them build themselves up?
Yeah, and linking that to the word mentor, which you imply, I guess, in the generational learning. But I think it's, if we just take the corporate world, there in some organization they have structured and built out mentoring programs where experienced people help young people or unexperienced people in different ways. And there's always the official version of that where it's like everything is staged and like this is the engagement process and that's how you need to engage and this is how you apply for being a mentor or a mentee or whatever. I think it's also about how can you give freedom to the possibilities of engagement without building a huge engine structure around it as a company. How do you ingrain that into the culture rather than setting up a program? How do you set up a culture where this is normal? Instead of that, you need to set up a program that's forcing people to do something that's not normal in that culture. And I think this freedom part is equally important from an experienced thinker and from a young thinker, where the thinker will get the freedom to kind of explore being new in a working environment, and the experienced thinker gets the possibility to support. And then both of them are learning. Like we always say, it's like both directions. But it's more about how do you create an environment of trust as a company culture that allows that that where this is organically helping. It's not a forced program, which at least in my experience they have never worked. You have like I've seen it. There was like a huge program, the top mentors of the business, only experienced people and a couple of bunch of youngsters, and they match them, and it's like now you are in a mentor relationship and you need to get things done, and that's the process of how you do that. Sounds all nice, but it's not building the bond and like the natural way of doing it.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a phrase that you use, Jens, around the unwritten rules,
Hmm.
and how that's really built out and through people and through relationships and through those almost personalized interactions rather than out and out group interactions. And there's a time for both inside of an organization. And I think just bringing that back to what you're mentioning about the freedom of the freedom of the possibility is around allowing people to explore and allowing people to figure things out. And I've used that term a lot in this conversation so far on, figuring it out. But I really do believe that there's something about, walking into a wall and having to pull yourself back up after you've walked into the wall
Mm.
and learning through doing. And that can be extremely daunting. Again, as a young thinker, you think, I want to try and get everything as perfect as possible because I want to impress this experienced thinker or this executive that's given me this responsibility. But I've personally had the experience where I've taken that approach and I've focused so much on the meticulous detail, and you then go back to it and you haven't asked questions. You haven't asked, why am I doing this? Or you haven't
Mm.
asked them for advice. And it was actually the wrong thing that I did. And so that put me further back because I wasn't comfortable enough with myself to go and ask the question, to go and say,
Yeah.
hey, am I doing this correctly? Or is this what you had in mind? And that's what I refer to about, building or prefacing a bigger question with maybe a smaller question so that you can validate what you're actually meant to be doing, so that it doesn't seem like you being lazy. Because I think young thinkers sometimes think that there's a perception out there that if I ask too many questions, I'm being lazy and I'm not actually internalizing
Mm.
what it is that I've been asked to do, and I'm wasting this executive's time. But I guarantee you, as I said, it's happened to me. I wasted a lot more of that executive's time because they had to then pick up the pieces which I had done incorrectly. Had 2 weeks earlier I just asked 3 or 4 or 5 questions, maybe I would not have been in that situation and I wouldn't have made a fool of myself. And I
Yeah.
think that, making a fool of yourself also isn't something that's negative. You need to realize that there are going to be times that does happen. And then it's building that consciously into your own development, but not being afraid to ask those questions. That's why I love that you brought that up, Jens.
Yeah. And I think that's fitting perfectly to the topic I've written down here, which is like the community of like-minded people and peers. Because when you like, if you just take your example, like you have been in that situation, if you have a group of peers who are, let's say, in a similar environment, they all have started, they all are doing similar things, and you share that between peers, they will not do it. They will learn from you in the same way they learn from themselves. And that's also going back to Sabina's podcast, which is going on. It's kind of weird plugging a lot of things today, but she was saying that the same. Being an entrepreneur, it's important to be part of a group that's dragging you out and helping you to say, "Hey, you need to get shit done. Hey, you need to do things. Hey, this is what I did. That's what I learned." And I think that's so important. And I can give a very practical example. I started in a company, and there was like this onboarding of newcomers, and there was no kind of community part of it. It was more about, this is the company, that's the vision, that's the structure, and that's what you need to know about that company, blah 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 blah. And it's like 20, 30 people all together in a new room, not getting to know each other properly. So what I did, being the connector, of course, I established a WhatsApp group, like I always do. Um, and that WhatsApp group helped people to connect, helped people to, in the same situation, all starters to engage with each other in different ways. Um, and then it's not about the WhatsApp group. It's more about, hey, there's a possibility where we can meet. So we met, and it was like people from different levels, from different age groups, from different parts of the world. It enabled us to meet in a digital environment, in a personal environment, and bring connections to each other. So we met. And of course, there's always like the core group with like 5, 6, 7 people who are really utilizing that, and 20 others around who are just joining for the Christmas market when you go out or whatever you do. It's like the bigger stuff. But it's quite fascinating that I've had it dozen of times where when I have been somewhere new, I have initiated things. Like another example, when I was starting in the retail world, inside the store, I've organized a running group. Like, hey, let's go out running every, I don't know, Thursday evening or whatever it was, and have a beer afterwards. It's again, it's like people grouping together in a different environment with similar topics, learning from each other while doing something, just having fun. And I think that's so important for young thinkers when you start in the working environment and you have never worked before, or you have worked in a different company before. If it's not if it's not happening, do it yourself. Be the initiator of, say, hey, we're all in the same boat right now. Hey, you guys are all new. I'm new. Let's meet together every Thursday or once a month or whatever, and share what's going on. And it sounds super basic, I know, but it's so powerful. I'm still connected to people from that running group, which is, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I did the same when I was starting in Moscow. I organized a running group. No, that is all
Yeah,
about
so
the running group, but it's connecting people in different ways. I have helped people to find jobs. I have helped people to do business, and it's over time you stick to people, and you connect and you learn from each other.
yeah, and there are a lot of red threads here, Jens, and specifically around people. And I think again a practical example, when I started out in my young career and very early on, I was given all of these tasks around creating these environments. So I had to go and try and build a running club. And at the time, I was also working at an investment manager's office and in the marketing team, and I was given the task of building an investment club. And I had no concept of how to do these. And I think that you raised such a great point there around, there are a lot of other people in the world that are going through similar things like this. So first and foremost, I encourage every young thinker to share some of the things that they're going through. And I think that I've referenced this in a number of different scenarios and podcasts and things, but we really do live in an extraordinary time around the ability to share what we're doing, but also to learn from others. And this reminds me of a podcast that was released on our channel today, was around a chat that we had with Michael Houghton. And he spoke about his journey in becoming a content creator and why he went about doing that. And right at the beginning of the episode, he talks about the importance of why he started his journey. he didn't start it for anyone else. He started for himself, and he thought, hey, I'm going to learn through doing. So
Yeah.
I'm going to learn how to fly FPV, first person view drones, and I'm going to document it because it's going to help me learn. I spend hours a day watching on YouTube how to put these things together, how to fly them so that I don't crash into all these buildings. But I'm going to document this journey that I'm on primarily for myself, and I hope that it adds some value to someone else out there, because one of the things that I've certainly been thinking about, and it ties into this learning environment and also sharing environment and trust building, is sometimes we think about the internet as being this extremely big place.
Yeah.
But despite the algorithms and some of the horrible things that happen on the internet, it also has this space to connect us to extraordinary people. And I think that if you use that analogy and what you mentioned around sharing with others and sharing your experiences, that's something that young thinkers actually do need to do themselves.
Hmm.
You're not walking this journey alone, you're walking it with others, and the internet can enable you to find those other people, which I think is an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah, the tricky thing with that is if you don't share, nobody knows. So that's why I agree. You can do that in the internet, in a public format. You can do that in any other format physically, but doing it and sharing what's going on as well. And I think that's a little bit a challenge in the society where we are in, um, sharing when things are not good, sharing when, hey, you're not feeling good. Like, hey, if we just take my example with the group, there was a person who says like, it sucks in this company. Like my manager is like literally not giving me any interesting thing. I'm just putting paper on paper on paper, and it's true story. And that person left the company later on, and everyone else was totally shocked because like different experience and things like, oh my god, how can that be part, like we're in the same company in the same building even, and you have such a different experience. So one thing is it grounded the others and appreciating what they have, but it will open up all of us to say, hey, yeah, I mean, one thing is empathizing with that person, but as well looking into how can we support you, which was a great community effort to see. Like literally, I brought her into my team for a while as, how was it? She just said like, there's a project that needs my help, and she was like literally jumping on supporting us in a couple of things just to learn something and have fun. And and then later on is like everyone was saying, okay, how can we help you to find a new job? It's not going to work with, because the manager is the problem. So I think this
Yeah, so
sharing is super powerful, especially if it's not about everything is positive and nice and fun. If you go deeper and say it's not working right now, I don't know why. In different
yeah,
fields, not just for young thinkers. I think it's the same for experienced thinkers.
yeah, and it reminds me of the saying that we are all human, and I
Mm.
think sometimes in the work world we can forget that because we have to put on this professional skin, this professional appearance, but acknowledging that people are human and we all are, and we have our bad days, we have our good days, we have fun, but we also have times that suck. And I think that that's a crucial thing to think about as a young thinker. Also acknowledging that you're never going to have days that, or a full year where you are operating at 100% every single day. And as much as you might think that and you might want that, um, I've personally tried and I've thought that I can do that, but you need to acknowledge it and you need to lean into those environments where you don't feel great,
Yeah,
because it's a journey of self-discovery, but it's also one of being mindful of how you interact with people when you're feeling like that. And
yeah,
there's this saying that when you show up, you need to show up as best as you can, and if you can't show up, you need to then make a different plan. And I think that just being mindful of that inside of dealing with people is extremely important, because you may be dealing with something that's got nothing to do with your role at work or with the responsibility that you've been given, but it's impacting the view that you have on that. And you can be incredibly disrespectful or short with people because of something that's happened externally. And
yeah,
I think that that's something just to be mindful of when you're saying what do young thinkers need. They also maybe need some guidance around that in terms of how best to deal with people inside of that space. But Jens, it's been another super, super live session with you. I've definitely learned a lot, and it's given me much to think about. And I just think maybe let's challenge ourselves here in setting up a bit of a challenge for the listeners and for those people who are tuning in live is how do we string this all together? What are some of the red threads that we've taken away from this? And how do we turn that into maybe a call to action for everyone that's listening?
Yeah. One thing I need to add before I go into that, it's like a therapy session for ourselves as well. So we're selfish a little bit, but I think it's fine. Like because it fits to what you just said. So how can we string that together? Uh, I truly believe that one thing is what need to be created, and that can be either from a young thinker or from an experienced thinker going now into action, is build community, find like-minded people in any way, in any shape or form, and discuss, share learnings, share experiences, good and bad, to support each other. And from an organization perspective is how do you create an environment that allows that? How do you create an environment where it's the norm that it's going to happen? Like specifically the generational learning and this mentorship piece, it's not about how do you set up a mentorship program. It's how do you change the company culture that a mentorship relationship is normal. And I think that's what I want to challenge everyone, figuring that out. And of course, if you need help, there are people who can help you, and we know a ton of people who would be awesome in supporting that. But it's not about that. It's thinking it through. What steps can you do to get there?
Yeah, I love that. And to add 2 points, because I'm not going to waffle and ramble on too long here, is the first thing that you mentioned, Jens, inside of this episode was around the importance of asking for help or asking questions. And I think that that's specifically targeted at young thinkers. Don't shy away from that.
Mm.
Actually ask those questions that you need to ask. And maybe if you're feeling uncomfortable in asking those questions, preface it with a more general question up front first, and then lead into the deeper or the harder question that you need to ask. And the second is really around, and when I say this, it sounds strange in my own head, so you guys might also find it a bit strange, is appreciation of failure. And I think that when we appreciate success, it touches on different emotions and things like that. But what does it mean in terms of how you connect with people, and what does that mean from a company and a culture building perspective when you appreciate failure? That
Yeah,
doesn't mean to say that you need failure as all encompassing. It just means that you look at it in a slightly different way, because it's a puzzle piece that's part of your bigger journey and helping you achieve significant things going forward.
love it, Joshua. Was a pleasure to be live together again.
Yeah, let's keep figuring out this live session. It's awesome to put ourselves on the spot, Jens,
Yeah,
to challenge our thinking and also to grow our own way of stringing things together. So, thanks so much for your time. It's an awesome to spend time with you yet again.
yeah. Thank you too. And for everyone who is watching or listening to this, come and join us every Friday, 11 o'clock in the morning, Central European time, which is Berlin time zone or Amsterdam time zone or Copenhagen time zone, um, where we do this. We would love to engage with you even more. So come and join us, ask questions. If you want to join us live, being on the show, getting interviewed, deconstructing topics around the reverse mental lab, we're happy to discuss that as well. So thank you very much for tuning in. And of course, see you next Friday or in one of the other recordings. Thank you very much and see